Week 12. Last week, I refactored the entire app. I rewrote the guest page, which is now done. It's not hooked up to the backend yet, but the UI elements are done. I rewrote the host login page, and that is hooked up to Supabase Auth. It's authenticating correctly. I also rewrote the dashboard for hosts, and that's also connected to the Supabase Postgres backend. Postgres database schema is also in place, and the database and the app are actually talking to each other correctly now. In other words, last week, in 1 week's time, I made more progress than I did the first 3 months, largely thanks to AI. But I learned a lot about working with AI last week, which I didn't anticipate before. Long story short, it's not as straightforward as I thought it was going to be. Originally, when I discovered the AI assistant, I was very amazed by what it could do. If you can see my last week's update to see how amazed I was. And as a result, I thought that you could just, ask it to implement some UI elements for you, and then you copy and paste the code into your project. It's not that straightforward. There's a lot of, besides the mistakes that it can make, one of the biggest issues that I ran into was that it likes to make assumptions about your project, like in terms of the things that you want in your project. As one example, I wanted it to implement some UI elements for me, and it just assumed that I wanted pessimistic updates. In other words, instead of updating UI elements immediately, and then make the network request to the backend to actually complete the user intent, it just sat there and waited for a second or two before the network requests came back positive. It would have been fine, but my app is not like financial transactions. It doesn't need to be 100% with 100% integrity. I want the user to have a more fluid and smooth experience over the data integrity 100% of the time. So I wanted it optimistically. And I had to essentially re-ask the AI to implement the feature for me, specifying that I wanted the optimistic updates. So stuff like this. And in this case, I caught it, right? When I was going through the UI, when I was going through the code, I was like, well, why are you doing this? And I pointed out to you. But in a lot of cases, we run the risk of not knowing what we don't know, not knowing what the AI has assumed for us and the other options that we might have in terms of implementing the features that we want. So as a captain at the helm, directing what the AI needs to do, we still need to be sort of vigilant about the things that our project wants, and we need to know what to ask the AI. Now, obviously, it's not always possible to know every possible possibilities with regards to the app and what you want and what you might be missing out on. One trick I discovered is that when I'm asking the AI to do something, I always ask it to ask me questions. As one example, let's say that I wanted to write a confirmation button, right? Please implement this confirmation button for me. And then I describe the expected behavior. If you click the confirmation, do this to that part, send this network request over there, and blah, blah, blah. And when this description is done, at the end, I always like to add, do not assume anything, ask me questions before proceeding. In 90% of the cases, if you're implementing something that's remotely beyond, even a little bit beyond trivial, it will ask you questions about the assumptions it was going to make. And that's one opportunity that you might have to sort of tell it what you want in terms of the assumptions it was going to make. I found this to be tremendously helpful. And of course, when it's asking you a question, you don't know the answer to that, or you don't really know, why you're asking me this? What do you mean by pessimistic updates and whatnot? You can ask it to explain to you. That's what it's good at. So the way I like to see the sort of the role of the current AI in terms of programming is that you can consider yourself a CEO, right? You hired a sort of mid-level dev who has eidetic memory with regards to all possible API features and all possible code base and whatnot, polyglot, super polyglot, right? But it doesn't really know how to make an app for you. So you, as the CEO, you need to know what to tell it to do, and you need to correct it when it runs into issues. And I think that's the best way to approach the current AI landscape with regards to assisting you to write a program. And don't get me wrong, it's tremendously helpful. It's a force multiplier in terms of your productivity. I could not imagine, especially for somebody like me, who's, again, not a 10x developer, I could not imagine making the progress that I made without its assistance. That's it for this week. At this point, I don't really know what's going to happen next week. I know I'm going to make progress, potentially tremendous progress in the app. My goal at the very minimum is to hook up the guest page to the Supabase Postgres backend. But I suspect that I will make more progress than that because I have this tool with me that just makes me a lot better programmer than I actually am. So that's it for this week, and I will see you next week.